The sound Thomas Reyes's fist made against his brother's jaw was the loudest thing Eleanor had ever heard in a church. She had never seen a man strike another before. Not like that, not without shouting first. And in the seconds that followed, Caleb going sideways into the pew, the congregation frozen, the minister's hands still raised, she stood at the altar in her wedding dress and understood, with a clarity that felt strange and cold and completely certain, that her life had just changed shape again. She did not know yet what shape it had changed into. She only knew that the bouquet was still in her hand, and she could not feel her fingers holding it. She was gripping it too tightly. She could feel that much, distantly, and a single white flower broke loose from the arrangement and fell without a sound to the church floor, and lay there between the altar and the pew, and no one noticed it but her. They left the church. She did not remember exactly how, only the carriage, and Isabel's face across from her, and the sound of the horses, and the way the flat Nebraska road looked like it had always looked, and nothing about it made any sense. They brought her back to the ranch. Caleb rode ahead. Isabel sat across from Eleanor in the carriage with her hands folded and her expression arranged back into its usual smooth composure, as though the last half hour had been an inconvenience now past. Neither of them spoke. Thomas was already there when the carriage pulled into the yard. He had ridden fast, he must have ridden very fast, and he was standing in front of the house with his hat still on and the dust of 2 roads on his coat. He was not looking at the carriage, he was looking at his mother. Doña Isabel descended from the carriage with the unhurried precision of a woman who has never in her life allowed an audience to see her flustered, and she stood in the yard and met her son's eyes and did not look away. "You handed her to him," Thomas said. He said it without raising his voice, without moving, with his hands at his sides. It was the flattest, most terrible way possible to say it. "I protected this family," Isabel said, "as I have always protected this family." "You handed her to him." He said it again because she had not answered it the first time, only moved around it. "She came all the way from Kansas. She trusted the name on those letters, and you let her walk through that door, and you let her spend 5 days in this house, and you stood in the front pew this morning and watched her say the words. To Caleb." A pause. "You knew from the first day." "I knew from the moment she stepped off that carriage," Isabel said, without any apparent difficulty in saying it. "And yes, I made a decision." "You were gone," she continued, her voice still smooth, still even. "You left 4 days before she arrived. You left this house, your family, your responsibilities, to sell grain. Whatever arrangements you had made, whatever plans you imagined existed in those letters, you were not here. Someone had to be." "I was gone 4 days," Thomas said, "not 4 years." The words landed between them and stayed there. "You were gone," Isabel said again, as though he had not spoken. "And Caleb saw an opportunity, and he took it. And I saw what had been taken, and I understood that there were worse outcomes, that this was workable, that this girl, alone, without family, without means, could be a help to this household and a settlement for your brother, and that perhaps something good could still be made of a mess that was already made. I'm not sorry for seeing clearly when it would have been easier to look away." She lifted her chin. "And I will not be made to feel that I have done something monstrous for doing what this family required." "What this family required," Thomas said. The quiet in his voice was a different kind of quiet from before. "What Caleb required. What Caleb has always required. From the moment he decided something was his, whether it was his or not." Isabel said nothing. "You knew what he was," Thomas said. "You have always known what he was, and you chose to make her the solution to it." He looked at her, truly looked at her, the way you look at someone you have been making allowances for your entire life and have finally stopped. "That is what I cannot forgive. Not the decision, the knowing." He turned. Caleb was standing at the edge of the yard near the barn, where he had been since they arrived, watching the scene with his arms loosely crossed and his expression arranged in something that looked, from a distance, like patience. Up close, it was something else. He was touching the side of his jaw with 2 fingers, the place where Thomas had hit him in the church, and watching his brother approach with the same expression he had worn in the pew, that strange, cold relief, as though the worst part had always been the waiting. Thomas stopped in front of him. "You read my letters," he said. Caleb said nothing. "Everyone," You took them out of the tray before I came in from the field for a year. He let that sit. And then you went to the station and you told her you were me. Thomas crossed the distance between them in one step and put his hands on his brother's collar. Caleb did not flinch. He looked up at his brother from very close, and when he spoke, his voice was completely even. She didn't love you, he said. She loved the letters. She loved the man she imagined on the other end of them. She trusted the words, not you. She had never seen your face. She didn't know your voice. A pause. I gave her the same words, the same sentences. Everything she thought she was falling in love with was already on those pages. I just delivered them in person. His expression did not change. You were never there, Thomas. I was. Thomas held him there for a long moment, jaw tight, saying nothing. And whatever you think about how it happened, Caleb said, she made her vows before God. She said the words, that doesn't come undone. You're not worth it, Thomas said, and let go. He stepped back. He looked at Eleanor then, for the first time since the church, truly looked at her, standing beside the carriage in her wedding dress with her bouquet at her side and a white flower missing from it. His face when he did it was not angry. It was something worse than angry. It was the face of a man standing in the wreckage of something he had been careful and patient and hopeful about for a long time, and who has no idea what to do with his hands. Are you all right? He said. It was such a small question for such a large moment. Eleanor looked at him, at the green eyes and the travel-dusty coat and the hands at his sides, and did not answer, because there was no honest answer available, and she had decided somewhere in the last hour that she was done with dishonest ones. I'm sorry, he said. It came out rough, like a word dragged over gravel. What happened to you in this house? I didn't know. I wouldn't have... He stopped. His jaw worked. I need to go. Thomas. Marisol had been standing at the corner of the house, and now she stepped forward. Thomas, please. I need to go, he said again. He did not look at Caleb. He did not look at his mother. He looked one more time at Eleanor, briefly, as though he were trying to hold something and couldn't. And then he turned and walked to the barn and came out minutes later on a horse and rode out of the yard at a pace that left dust in the air long after he was gone. Marisol ran after him. She ran the way you run when you know you probably can't catch up but have to try anyway, her school coat and her braid flying, calling his name down the long road, and Eleanor stood in the yard in her wedding dress and watched her go and felt something very large and very cold settle into the center of her chest, the way an anchor finds the bottom. She could hear Marisol calling his name. She could hear the sound diminishing, growing smaller, until it was gone. Carmen came to her elbow without a word, took the bouquet from her hand, and led her inside and up the stairs. That was where they put her, Caleb's room. Carmen pulled the veil from Eleanor's hair, set it on the chair by the window, and left, closing the door quietly behind her. Eleanor sat on the edge of the bed in her wedding dress and did not move. She had no money, no way back. And underneath all of it, something heavier than either. She had stood before God and said the words. She had not known what she was saying them to, but she had said them, and they did not unknow themselves just because the ground had turned out to be wrong. It was not Caleb. It was Marisol, still in her travel coat, hair half undone now from the run, eyes red but dry. She stood in the doorway for a moment, and she looked so young in that moment, so genuinely and uncomplicatedly sorry, that something in Eleanor's chest cracked open the way ice cracks before it gives way entirely. He's gone, Marisol said. He took a horse from the Kellerman farm down the road. He wouldn't let me. She stopped. He said he needed time. He said he would write. Eleanor nodded. Marisol came into the room. She sat down on the chair by the window without being asked, with the directness of a person who has decided to be present and means it. I'm not going to tell you it's going to be all right, she said, because I don't know if that's true and you seem like someone who would know the difference. She looked at her hands in her lap, then back up. What I can tell you is that you are not alone in this house. As long as I am here, you are not alone. A pause. I know that's not much. It's not nothing, Eleanor said. Her voice was rougher than she expected. It was the first thing she had said in several hours. Marisol nodded. I'm also going to help you. I don't know how yet, but I'm going to. She said it the way she said most things, simply as a fact, as something she had already decided and was simply now informing the world about. My mother's going to tell you this is your life now, and that you should be grateful, and that there's no other option. She's very good at saying things like that. I need you to know that she is not always right, even when she sounds like she is. Eleanor looked at her for a long moment. At 17, Marisol Reyes had her father's steady eyes and her mother's sharp intelligence, and neither of them had yet managed to make her afraid of anything. And Eleanor thought, sitting in that room that was not hers, that Marisol might be the most remarkable person she had ever met. "Thank you," Eleanor said. "Don't thank me yet," Marisol said. "I haven't done anything." But she stayed. She stayed until the lamp had to be lit, talking about small things and large ones, about Thomas, about the county, about a horse she had been training at school, about their father who had been dead 3 years and had been, she said simply, a better man than either of his sons had managed to be yet, though she thought Thomas might still get there. She talked the way people talk when they're trying to build something in a short time, laying plank after plank across a gap, and Eleanor let her, because there was comfort in it, even when the words themselves were not comforting. Caleb came to the room that night. Eleanor had known he would. She had spent the hours after Marisol left sitting at the writing desk with her journal open and the pen in her hand, and nothing written, listening for footsteps in the hall. When she heard them, she did not move. When the door opened, she was already standing. He filled the doorway the way he always filled rooms, the dark golden hair, the blue eyes, the broad shoulders, and he had changed out of his wedding clothes into a plain shirt and trousers, and for a moment, in the lamplight, with his hair slightly disordered and his jaw still faintly marked where Thomas's fist had caught it, he almost looked like a different kind of man than the one she knew him to be. Almost. "Eleanor," he said. He said it warmly, the way he said everything, as though they were beginning a conversation they had been looking forward to. "Don't," she said. He stopped. "Don't say my name like that." She held herself very still. "Don't say anything like that. Not in this room. Not to me." She looked at him directly, the way she had looked at Isabel in the sitting room 3 days ago, the same straight spine and the same level gaze, but this time there was nothing polite underneath it. "I am asking you," she said. "I am asking you plainly, as one person to another. Don't touch me, don't come near me. What you did, what you and your mother did, I don't have words for it yet. But I know what I'm asking you right now, and I'm asking you to hear it." Something moved across Caleb's face. It was not remorse. It was something more complicated than remorse, a kind of cold assessment, the look of a man recalculating, deciding which version of himself to be in this moment. And then the decision was made, and the warmth dropped out of his face entirely, and what was left was what had always been underneath it. "You're my wife," he said. His voice was very quiet. "Whatever you think happened, whatever Thomas told you, whatever any of them said today, you stood at an altar and said the words. That's not something that gets undone because you're upset about how it happened." He took a step into the room. "You're going to feel however you feel. That's fine. But sooner or later you will be entirely mine, Eleanor. There's nothing either of us can do about that." "Get out," she said. "This is my room." "Get out," she said again. He took another step, and the lamplight caught his eyes, and Eleanor felt, for the first time since she had stepped off the train in Nebraska, something that was not grief or shock or loneliness, but simple, clarifying fear. And then the door behind Caleb opened, and Don Rufino was there. The old steward filled the doorway the way large, quiet men sometimes do, not with threat exactly, but with a weight that made the room feel different. He had his dark servant's coat on, and his silver mustache and his tired, kind eyes, and he looked at Caleb with an expression Eleanor had not seen on his face before. Not the careful deference he showed in the ordinary hours of his day, but something underneath that, something older and more immovable. "Don Caleb," he said, "the hour's late. Your mother's asking for you." A silence. "My mother's asleep," Caleb said. "She has asked for you," Rufino said again, in exactly the same tone, and did not move. Another silence. Longer. Caleb looked at Rufino. Rufino looked at Caleb. The look that passed between them was not a new one. It was the look of two people who have been in the same house for a very long time and understand each other completely. and what it said on Rufino's side was not a request. Caleb turned back to Eleanor. The manufactured warmth was gone. What he gave her instead was a look she would remember for a long time, flat and certain and patient, the look of a man who is comfortable with waiting. And then he walked out of the room, past Rufino and into the corridor, and his footsteps went down the hall. Rufino stood in the doorway a moment longer. He looked at Eleanor with his kind, tired eyes, and he said nothing, because there was nothing adequate to say. He pulled the door gently closed, and she heard his footsteps going the other direction, and she was alone. She sat down on the edge of the bed very slowly and put her face in her hands, and she cried the way she hadn't let herself cry at the church or in the carriage or in front of Marisol, without composure, without the straight spine, without any of the things she usually held in place. She cried for Kansas and for her father and for the letters she had written with such care and the answers she had read with such hope. She cried for Sam Whitlock, briefly and unexpectedly, in the way you sometimes cry for losses you thought you had finished with, as though grief has a way of pooling in the new low places. And she cried for the Thomas Reyes she had never met, but had somehow known, and for the green-eyed man who had looked at her across a ruined church this morning with an expression that had broken something in her she hadn't even known she was carrying. And when there was nothing left, she lay down on top of the coverlid in her wedding dress and stared at the ceiling until it was light. Saturday arrived the way Saturdays do in working houses, without ceremony and without patience. The smell of coffee and bread from below, the sound of boots on the stairs, the particular quality of morning light that makes the night before feel both very close and very far away. Eleanor dressed herself in her plain blue-gray dress, pinned her mother's brooch at her collar, and went downstairs. Isabel was already at the table. She looked up when Eleanor came in, assessed the state of her with a single efficient glance, the red eyes, the controlled posture, the brooch, and said nothing about any of it. She gestured to the chair across from her. "You'll find the household runs on a schedule," she said when Eleanor had sat down. "Breakfast at 7, the weekly accounts are reviewed on Thursdays. Carmen manages the household staff and reports to me, which means she will now also report to you on domestic matters, though I would ask that any decisions of significance be discussed with me first." She poured coffee into Eleanor's cup with the precise, practiced motion of a woman who has run a large house for 30 years. "You are the wife of this household now. I expect you to conduct yourself accordingly." Eleanor picked up her cup. "And if Caleb comes to my room again," she said in the same even tone Isabel had used, "I'll expect the same intervention that was provided last night." Something moved in Isabel's eyes. It might, in another woman, have been surprise. "Rufino operates according to my instructions," Isabel said. "Good," Eleanor said. "Then we understand each other." She drank her coffee. Isabel watched her drink it. Somewhere in the middle of that small, cold exchange, something was established between them. Not warmth, not trust, but a kind of mutual recognition, two people deciding they understood the exact nature of their arrangement. Caleb came down 20 minutes later, fresh and smooth-faced and unreachable, and took his place at the table with the ease of a man who has never once in his life lost a night's sleep over anything he has done. He spoke about the cattle prices. He asked Isabel about the north pasture fences. He passed Eleanor the bread with a warm, attentive smile that reached no part of him behind the eyes. She took the bread and said thank you and ate it without tasting it, and the whole performance was so practiced and so complete that she understood in a new and colder way exactly what she was dealing with. Not a man who had done a bad thing. A man who did not believe the thing he had done was bad. It was Rufino who found her afterward in the kitchen garden, where she had gone because she needed to be outside and she did not know where else to go. He came around the side of the house with a basket of something and stopped when he saw her and set the basket down and looked at her with his tired eyes. "Señorita," he said, then stopped, then started again. "The Kellerman farm is 4 miles east on the county road. The family there, they have a reputation for being close-mouthed." He picked up his basket. "The postmaster in town is a man named Aldrich. He has held this position for 20 years. He paused. "He's also close-mouthed." He walked on into the garden and began his work, and Eleanor stood very still for a moment, holding what he had given her. Not much, and far from a plan, but a thread. the beginning of a thread. The fight with Isabel came that afternoon, and it was about Marisol. Isabel had summoned Marisol to the sitting room and delivered her verdict with the smooth finality of someone announcing a weather pattern. The school term resumed in 3 weeks. Marisol would return at the end of this week to prepare, and this was not a negotiation. She said it all in front of Eleanor, perhaps because she wanted Eleanor to understand the shape of this house, who decided things and who did not. Marisol sat across from her mother in the chair by the window, with her hands in her lap and her back straight, and her expression absolutely still. And when Isabel finished, she said, "No. I beg your pardon. I said no." Marisol kept her voice low and even, the way Thomas had kept his voice in the church, not hot, not performative, but very certain. "I am not going back to school this week. I am staying here. You will do as you are told." "I've been doing as I'm told my entire life," Marisol said, "and a woman came into this house because we told her it was safe, and we told her it was good, and we told her she was marrying Thomas." Her eyes went briefly to Eleanor and back to her mother. "I'm not leaving her alone in this house, not yet, not while—" She stopped herself from saying whatever she had been about to say. "I'll go back to school when I'm satisfied she's going to be all right." "You are 17 years old," Isabel said, "and your satisfaction is not the organizing principle of this household." "No," Marisol agreed pleasantly. "Yours is, and you've organized it quite thoroughly." She stood up, smoothed her skirt, and looked at her mother with the calm of someone who has made a private decision and is simply waiting for the world to catch up. "I'll be in the garden if you need me." She left. The door closed behind her with a very small, very final click. Isabel sat alone with the aftermath of it for a moment, and Eleanor, who had watched the whole exchange from the sofa where she had been a silent witness, said nothing. But she thought about a girl who had grown up in this house with this woman and with Caleb, and had come out of it with a spine like that. And she felt something new, not hope exactly, which seemed too large and too fragile for what she had available, but something that might grow into it in time. Caleb showed her his real face on Sunday evening. It was small, a door closing too hard when he thought no one was listening, a comment made to Carmen about Eleanor's place in the household that carried a particular edge, the way he looked at Eleanor across the dinner table when Isabel was talking to Rufino, and he thought he had a moment of privacy, and none of it was anything she could point to. There was nothing that anyone watching from the outside would have identified as wrong. But Eleanor had grown up reading land and weather and livestock, and she knew the difference between a storm that was far away and one that was building, and what she read in Caleb on Sunday evening was the second kind. She wrote it in her journal that night. She had gotten into the habit of writing at the small desk by the window, with the lamp turned low after everyone else in the house was quiet. It was the only time that felt entirely hers. "The charm is a costume," she wrote. "I think I always knew that, even on the platform, even in the first days. What I didn't know was what was underneath it. Now I'm starting to. I need to not be afraid of knowing. Fear is the thing he is counting on. Marisol is not afraid. Rufino is not afraid. I have to decide whether I am the kind of woman who cannot be afraid, or the kind who simply pretends not to be until the pretending becomes true. I suspect the difference between those two things is smaller than it seems. I wonder where Thomas is tonight. I wonder if he has slept. I wonder if he thinks about the fact that none of this, none of it, was either of our faults, and whether that thought helps him or makes things worse." She crossed out the last 2 sentences. She wrote them again underneath. She left them this time. 4 miles east at the Kellerman farm, Thomas Reyes was sitting at a borrowed table in a borrowed room, and he was writing a letter. The Kellermans had asked no questions. Old Kellerman had opened the door on Friday afternoon, taken one look at Thomas's face and the horse he'd ridden in on, and the travel coat he still hadn't changed out of, and said only, "You'll want the back room. Clara will bring something to eat." That was all. The family had left him alone with the particular courtesy of people who have lived long enough to know that some things don't need explaining. He had not slept much in the 2 nights since. He had lain in the narrow backroom bed and looked at the ceiling and gone over and over the same territory, the way you go over ground you know is damaged, looking for the thing you missed, the moment where you should have seen it coming. He didn't find it. That was the honest answer, and also the one that cost him the most. There was no moment where he should have seen it coming, because Caleb had always been this, and Thomas had always known Caleb was this, and he had left anyway. He had gone to sell grain and left the house empty and his letters sitting in the mail tray, and he had thought, not for the first time in 36 years, that surely this time, Caleb would not. He was wrong about Caleb the way you are always wrong about the people you grew up with the particular stubbornness of someone who has watched a person be a certain way their entire life and keeps expecting them to become someone else. It had started early, not the lying, which came later, but the other thing. The way their mother had always looked at Caleb as though he were the answer to a question she'd never managed to ask Thomas. The best cuts of meat, the seat closest to the fire, the horse their father had promised Thomas for his 15th birthday, which arrived saddled and brushed and led to Caleb instead because Caleb had told their mother he wanted it, and their mother had arranged the world accordingly, as she had always arranged the world accordingly. And when Thomas had stood in the yard watching his brother ride away on his horse, he had not said a single word, because their father had put a hand on his shoulder the week before he died and said, "Thomas, look after them." And he had understood, even at 19, that looking after them meant absorbing certain things quietly. He had absorbed a great many things quietly in the years since. He picked up his pen. He had started the letter 4 times. The first 3 attempts he'd pushed aside, too angry, too careful, too formal. The 4th time, he let himself simply write, in the plainest words available, what was true. The kitchen lamp burned low. Outside, the Kellerman fields were dark and flat and full of the particular silence of the plains at night, the kind of silence that isn't empty but full, the kind his father had once said you either learned to love or spent your whole life being afraid of. He was his father's son in that way, at least. He wrote about Caleb the way you write about something you have spent a long time trying to see clearly, without varnish, without the softening that family puts on things, and without quite being able to keep all the love out of it even so. He wrote about the horse, and about other things before the horse, and about what it was to grow up watching your mother hold you and your brother on opposite sides of a scale and put her thumb on one side of it without ever seeming to know she was doing it. He wrote about their father's last night, in November 3 years ago, the smell of wood smoke and the sound of the cattle in the field below the window, their father's hand in his, and what had been asked of him in that room, and why he had said yes, and what saying yes had cost him in the years between then and now. He wrote that he was going to find a way to have the marriage annulled. He did not know yet how. He was going to find out. And then he wrote the part that had taken him longest, because it was the part he was least proud of, and the part he could not leave out. He wrote that he knew that she had not done anything wrong, that none of what had happened was her fault, that she had trusted letters that were genuine and a name that was real, and that there was no way, at a train station, looking at a man you had never seen but had corresponded with for a year, to know you were looking at the wrong one. He knew all of this. He believed all of this. And still, he wrote. And still, when the doors opened and I saw you there, I couldn't separate what I felt from where I put the fault. I know that isn't fair. I know it isn't right. But I want to be honest with you the way I was honest with you in the letters, because you deserve that more than you deserve another man managing what he tells you to protect you from how small he sometimes is. I was angry at you for half a second in that church, and I'm telling you, because you deserve to know the truth of things even when the truth is not flattering to the person telling it. I am sorry for that half second. You didn't earn it. He folded the letter. He sealed it. He wrote her name on the outside. Then he sat for a while in the borrowed room with the letter in his hands, looking at his own handwriting on the envelope in the low lamplight, and he thought about patience, about what his father had taught him about not rushing good horses, and he thought that some things you could not rush, and some things you could not wait for either, and knowing the difference was the whole problem. Thursday morning, Marisol found her in the morning room after breakfast. She came in without knocking, in the way she had started doing, and she sat down across from Eleanor and put a folded letter on the table between them. Not a scrap of paper, not a 2-line note, but a real letter, several pages, sealed and with Eleanor's name on the outside in handwriting she would have known anywhere. Rufino delivered it. Eleanor looked at it. She picked it up. She broke the seal. She read it the way she had always read Thomas's letters, slowly, without skipping, the way you read something you want to keep. she read it twice. When she was finished, she folded it carefully along its creases. And that was when the second piece of paper slipped out. Small, separate, folded tight, tucked inside the envelope beneath the letter itself, as though placed there deliberately, as though Thomas had not been certain until the last moment whether to include it at all. Eleanor unfolded it slowly. There was one line. "There is one more thing I couldn't tell you." She stared at it, read it again. Her eyes went back to the letter, looking for the thread, for anything she might have missed, and found nothing. Whatever it was, he had decided to say it separately. He had decided to make her ask for it. She was still holding the paper when she heard the footsteps in the corridor outside, heavy, unhurried, coming closer. Eleanor looked up at the door. The footsteps stopped. "Thank you for spending time with me today. If this story touched you about the cost of staying and the quiet courage it takes to keep your eyes open when everything around you wants them shut, I hope you'll join me again." There's a piece of paper in Eleanor's hand with a sentence that isn't finished and a door in front of her, and what is on the other side of it will change everything that comes next. Consider subscribing so you don't miss what happens next. Until then, keep the light on the porch.